presentation. We're so delighted you all joined us today, and we're gratified to see the level of interest in today's session. We had close to 200 people sign up, and we hope many will participate during the session. This is obviously to discuss the future of the harbor, and there was so much enthusiasm over the report written by Sally Scott and Joby that we decided to host this webinar for them on reimagining the harbor to present to you, to respond to questions, and hopefully have some time for conversation among the participants with us. I mentioned I'm Laurie Schwartz, president of Waterfront Partnership. I first want to recognize staff that helped us pull the session together today, Adam Lindquist and Chelsea Ansbach. So thank you to Chelsea and to Adam. So for those who are unfamiliar with us, we are a nonprofit and a business improvement district. We cover the areas of the waterfront at the Inner Harbor, Harbor East, Harbor Point, and Fells Point. And we're best known by some of our accomplishments or family members, like Mr. Trash Wheel is a close family member. He belongs to our family. And Rashfield Park, we recently opened in November. Many of you have been there. I know, I recognize many of you. The Inner Harbor Ice Rink, the several events that we host, the flotilla when the harbor is filled with kayakers, hundreds of kayakers, and Harbor Harvest when Rashfield is filled with hundreds of children running around playing, taking pony rides, train rides, and the like. So a few things to note. First, we received some questions about how this reimagining the harbor differs from our Inner Harbor 2.0 updated master plan. That's really more of a physical plan, and reimagining the harbor is more of a set of ideas, programmatic plan, ways to experience the harbor, how we can improve the experience of the harbor and connect it better to the rest of the city and to neighborhoods, particularly in the city. A few other notes. Harbor Place is kind of the elephant in the room. We're hopeful there will be a change soon, but most of us, all of us, I don't know anything for sure. So while we welcome your ideas about Harbor Place, we really hope this can be a conversation about the Inner Harbor as a whole and ideas about the broader Inner Harbor. Last, thank you for signing up. As I said, we have close to 200 people signed up, and we're looking forward to getting input today, as well as following the session and continuing this conversation in smaller group sessions going forward. If you're interested, there'll be opportunities to sign up after the session. So our facilitator today is Carmara Thomas Wilheit, Director of Urban Conservation Initiatives at the Conservation Fund. Carmara was a member of our staff for many years on the Healthy Harbor team and moved on to work at Chesapeake Bay Foundation and now the Conservation Fund. We weren't ready to sever formal ties with Carmara, so we asked her to join our board, where she's been a very active and very helpful board member. So I'm happy to turn this over to Carmara. Take it away. Carmara, you want to unmute yourself? Or maybe our staff can unmute you.
There we go. Trying to. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much, Laurie, for that introduction. Welcome everyone to this webinar. This discussion is really to focus on hearing from you, Baltimoreans who live and work and play at the Inner Harbor. And this is an opportunity for us to learn and discuss a future for an inclusive Inner Harbor for all. Before we get started, we do want to start with a poll. So we want to hear from you right off. Chelsea, can you launch the poll for us? How many times have you come to Baltimore's Inner Harbor in the past year other than for work? Select your multiple choice there, and then we'll share the results. Hope you all have made a selection. Chelsea, can you share the results with us? So on the screen, if you aren't able to see that or aren't looking at the screen right now, about 36% of the folks on this webinar have been to the Inner Harbor 13 or more times. 13% have been 0. So we need to get you down there. Thank you so much for taking that poll for us. It's great to see who's been to the harbor and who's on this call with us. To provide some context, I'd like to turn it over to Joby Taylor and Sally Scott, both professors at UMBC. Joby?
Thanks, Carmara, and good midday to everyone. It's a pleasure to be a part of this conversation, and I see some familiar faces and a lot of new faces with us. And so our hope today is to just keep jump-starting a conversation about what the people of Baltimore, what ideas and what process we can bring to thinking about this important downtown space around the harbor. So I'm Joby Taylor. I have been at UMBC for 23 years, so since 1999, and have lived and worked and played and learned in Baltimore City since that time. So I'll just make a few opening remarks, and you'll have access to the paper as well after. But you know, during that 2+ decades of time, one of my, both related to my work and just my life and interests, has been moving around the city, walking streets and driving streets and walking parks and trails and in communities, living in Reservoir Hill first, and then now a proud member of Dorchester community up near Forest Park. So across that time, have loved exploring Baltimore. And if you're like me, Baltimore, I love our city. It takes a good couple decades before I can confidently call it my city. I feel like I'm dug in now. And you know, one way to see a city is from below, like walking and talking and meeting folks. And I think that's, you know, the way to really get to know a place and its people and its cultures and its histories and stories. But there's also the kind of view from above. And we know that Federal Hill Park is one of those views in our city where you can look out, and sometimes those views are very telling, and they can be inspiring too in terms of helping us understand what the larger collection of communities is that we call Baltimore. So by way of introduction, I'm going to share my screen and just say that today is about imagination, reimagining. What's the Baltimore that we want to pull together for our collective futures? And to start by saying a city is a collection of people that have imagined themselves and reimagined it over time, and Baltimore is no different. So I'm going to just share a couple of images to prime the pump. This is not to sidetrack us, but just to say that what is it? We can reimagine Baltimore in creative, inclusive, and vibrant ways because it has been reimagined over time. So, for example, early on, we had this our Waterfront Partnership hosts. We have this a town that was established on a waterfront. It had a prehistory too, right? Before those early colonial images. A pastoral basin where that became an agricultural port, a port for immigration and trading of goods as an early American city. In the mid 1800s, of course, we know Federal Hill was reestablished as a fort, essentially captured Baltimore City. So here we can see that rising industrial city with a military outpost on it, right? We have created and recreated this space we know as Baltimore many times, and as led by vision and by planning and by process, this place has taken shape in different ways. It had a long life as an industrial port where not just a trading of goods, but large scale manufacturing, and the city's size increased dramatically during this time. So as an industrial port, there was a moment when that industry was beginning to leave and go elsewhere, and there was cultural upheaval and in the city as well, where there was a moment where some of the planners under urban renewal suggested that that port should become a highway system, right? And some of you know the stories of getting that project stopped, and it was reimagined in the 70s, first through the Baltimore Fair, the city fairs, and then with the Harbor Place pavilions as the harbor that we know today. And this brings us to our question as we see some of the harbor spaces begin to dilapidate and the city center shift east in some ways. And there's a need. We're in a moment where reimagination is called for. And so our paper is really not to say exactly what that new imagination should be, but to say we have a chance to try to do it right from a process perspective, to think what will we reimagine, and to do it inclusively, to think about reimagining not just the harbor, but the harbor as the city, and the city as its people, to do that inclusively, to bring people to the table that haven't always been at the table in those reimaginings, to think about doing it restoratively as an opportunity to heal some of those divisions and create new connections creatively and boldly. So I'll stop sharing and just conclude some remarks by saying, our hope with thinking about this paper as we lived and moved around through the city and looked out over it and participated in partnerships is to really encourage us to pause and take significant time to come together and reimagine collectively, and to do this in a way that goes beyond what we had, putting a coat of paint on what's there, but to think what's the next act, and can it be something that really pulls us together across our diversity and across some of the divisions, historical and structural, and creates new kinds of spaces for a Baltimore moving forward. I will stop there with that statement of leading development with values. And I want to introduce my friend and colleague, Sally Scott, who has been thinking about this with me and with our students and with community partners for several years now. And so I'm proud to introduce Sally Scott.
Thank you, Joby. I love seeing those old images, though the one of the highway always makes my stomach hurt a bit, because that could have been the harbor's future. Thank God it wasn't. Yeah, I want to get into some of the more immediate background of the paper to flesh out how we developed our approach and what we're trying to accomplish here. Joby and I teach an introduction to community leadership course through UMBC, and this is for master's and certificate students. And in our fall 2020 course, we were teaching primarily online in the midst of COVID, but we were able to safely hold several outdoor classes in Baltimore over the semester. And we chose the Inner Harbor as the location of our final outdoor class. And we had a beautiful November afternoon for the first half of the class, which we held in the West Shore Park, which is a lovely spot. And in this class, we heard from our students who are of a variety of ages, 20s, 30s, 40s, even 50s, that they were not spending as much time at the harbor, particularly around the pavilions, wasn't a compelling place for them anymore. And for me, who, when my kids were young, spent a lot of time down at the harbor, this was interesting to hear and interesting to understand. So for the second half of the class, when the sun set, we went up to the top of Federal Hill to get that big view that Joby mentioned. And we talked about the harbor's past and its present and what it could potentially become in the future. What would bring people like our students who really care about Baltimore, care about Baltimore's neighborhoods, back to the harbor on a regular basis. And that conversation was eye-opening for me, hearing our students talk about their experiences, reflecting on my long-term experience as a Baltimore resident and a community revitalization advocate. And also Joby's many years of teaching about places and placemaking in Baltimore. And this led to our writing an opinion piece the following spring on reimagining the harbor. And if you've read that piece, you may have noted the headline, which we didn't write, which the Sun gave to the piece, which indicated that we want the harbor for residents and not for tourists. And that's tremendously misleading. It's not what we meant, because we think that a reimagined harbor, something that has a more authentic connection to the rest of the city, would attract more residents and more visitors. And not only to the harbor, but also from what they could learn at the harbor back out to explore other parts of Baltimore. So our vision is really that the harbor should reflect and connect to Baltimore as a whole, not be a special place for whoever can make it down there, and to be a more truly inclusive and welcoming public space. And so that's the vision that we put out in the opinion piece, and we received dozens of comments back. Clearly, this struck a chord. People have a strong, if complex, relationship to the harbor if they've lived in Baltimore for any amount of time. And it was really in going through, reading those comments, organizing them into different categories, that we realized there was much more to say, in partnership really with the people we were getting comments from. And that's when we turned the opinion piece into a longer paper and incorporated our readers' comments. So really in reading this paper, which I hope if you haven't already, you have a chance to do, there are multiple and diverse Baltimore voices in our paper, and it's really just a process. It's not a final word on this topic at all. It's really just a step in what we hope is a much longer process. And I think our vision is definitely in line with what the Waterfront Partnership has been doing recently. They've creatively remade Rash Field. They're promoting works of art and natural landscapes in different areas around the harbor, and encouraging people to get in their kayaks and their canoes and explore the larger harbor area. And if you haven't done that, it's really fun to do. That said, the good work is happening and will continue to happen, but we really want to encourage all the folks who are decision makers around the harbor, including Waterfront Partnership, but many others, City of Baltimore, many of the institutions in the area, to be open to new voices and to significantly expand inclusive approaches to planning for the harbor. And I think a high priority for us and for many of our commenters was creating more opportunities for local residents, especially entrepreneurs and artists. Baltimore's rich culturally. There's a lot of social entrepreneurship bubbling up, but we don't see that yet fully reflected in the harbor. Also want to mention that this process of reimagining the inner harbor should connect to reimagining the middle branch, which is ongoing in the south and west of the harbor. So they've got a process with significant resident input and leadership that they're starting to implement, system of trails, parks, restored landscape, public amenities that are reconnecting those neighborhoods to the waterfront and trying to overcome a really tough history of being divided by industrial areas and highways. And, we can learn from and connect to that. So Joby and I are not designers. We're not planners. We don't have all the answers as far as what the harbor should become, but we're really advocating for laying the groundwork for a creative, inclusive planning process. And in my view, what would follow that process would not be a sudden transformation, but an iterative and collaborative series of initiatives that would reshape the area physically, but as are more important, would attract new programming, new people, new ideas that would much better connect the harbor to the rest of Baltimore. So I will stop there and hand it back to Carmara.
Thank you, Sally. And thank you, Joby, for that context as well. So this is an opportunity for the last 30 minutes or so to hear from you, the audience. In the reactions feature on the bottom of your screen, there's a raise your hand feature. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and then we will proceed to take you off of mute so that you can ask your question or provide a comment or suggestion. You can also do that in the chat. And then please limit your question or your comment to about 1 minute. We have a lot of folks on the call today and we just want to make sure that we get to as many people as possible. Again, please put your question or comment or suggestion in the chat, but also use that raise your hand feature. Or raise your hand physically. Let's see here. Terrell Brown is the first hand that I see raised. Chelsea, do you mind helping me? Oh, there you go. I think you're off mute now.
Hello, everybody. How y'all doing?
Hello.
Put my hand down. I just wanted to ask. I mean, I heard that you all said that like y'all are laying down the groundwork, and you're looking to work with like creatives and be inclusive. But like, what are the plans around that? I mean, I think a lot of times, like with the harbor in particular, like these words get thrown around, but historically, there's been ways of aggressively making sure that people aren't included in these projects. So like, like what are the plans to aggressively include people in these projects that's from Baltimore?
Can you hear me okay? There we go. Thanks. Terrell, I think it was. Thank you for that. And I'd seen your similar question in the chat bar. So yes, I first of all just affirm that is a historic challenge, is basically how does the process happen and who's included and who decides. And so our hope really is to continue building some citizen momentum and partnerships with organizations that basically build some political will and build energy around the idea of a planning a process that would kind of be pushed to include voices that have not traditionally been at or around the table, and that process be open and extended and supported for a lengthy amount of time. And I completely agree, the opportunity that we have that I think is extraordinary is not to do something where you just rush to a design and and then put the resources behind that, but to really have an extended process. So that's really our first recommendation, is to ask the mayor and leading organizations and other players and people to support an extensive process, which would include research into what's happening elsewhere, research into all of the great artists and entrepreneurs and community histories and community leaders that we have right here in our own city, and begin from that to build a process that moves towards plans and iterations, as Sally said, like instances of that can create space for things like local artists representations, stories and other things to be a part of that. So difficult, not really, hadn't been our strong suit in the past, but that's what we're kind of pushing for, is mostly on that process. And I'll stop there, see if Sally's got anything to add.
Yeah, I think you got it captured, Joby. I think that process should be guided by a set of principles. And, we don't have those, all laid out in a set, a clear set, but I think in our paper, there are a number of those kinds of principles you could glean from the paper, and that if a smaller group could kind of work together to clarify those principles and then open it up so that really whoever is motivated, who's ever engaged, whoever wants to be, have a voice in the harbor's future, has an opportunity to make a contribution, to have their voice heard in this process we're talking about.
I want to pause and just acknowledge in the chat bar that there's been requests for closed captioning. I don't know that we have that capability or not right now. It seems that we may not. And so I'll just say that in the follow-up recordings of this and things, we'll do every effort to make sure that there's a caption version of that. So apologize for that technology exclusion, and we'll hope to remedy that after the session. Thanks.
Yeah, let me, thanks, Joby and Sally. David, we can call on you in a minute too. I'm noticing some of the questions that and comments that people are giving. The harbor should be a place where you don't need money to enjoy. The idea of a bunch of vendors worries me. Things like that are mentioned a few times. We do sponsor lots of events around the harbor, and I'd be interested in programs, and I'd be interested in hearing what kinds of events or activities or programs people would be interested in seeing. Just a note that we do perform market research or opinion polls, an independent firm, with of just city residents, demographics matching the demographics of the city. And the most repeated comments of what brings people to the harbor are to just walk along the water and enjoy the area, free outdoor events, be interested to hear what kinds of events and programs many of you would be interested in or would be inspire you to come to the harbor. And then last, the most frequently cited is to visit an attraction like the aquarium or science center. We do show also along those surveys that many people do come to the harbor, high percentage, come 7 to 12 times a year besides for work. So we want to increase that number. We want people to be comfortable and feel welcome at the harbor. So I'd be interested, and you can put them in the chat or comment section. What would bring you to the harbor? Carmara, you can't unmute. I don't know how to unmute David.
There we go. I'm unmuted. Thank you. All right. Yeah, there are a lot of questions bubbling up in the chat, but I also, Colleen, did you have your hand up before I asked some of the questions that were in the chat? Hopefully you're able to unmute now. No.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to echo about the closed captioning. I'm glad that was brought up. And then I also wanted to I'm sure you all are monitoring the chat, but there's been some great conversation about the Baltimore American Indian Center. Yes. And some of the other indigenous communities that have been currently and in the past in this area. So I just wanted to make sure that got talked about too. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. I think David had a question. Walton.
I have 3 hands up too, so 4, 5. All right, so we have Keenan, Michael, Ebony, Betty, and then Lair. I think that's your hand up as well. So in that order, if you're able to take yourself off of mute and ask your question. Keenan, okay, great. I think you're off mute now.
Hi, my name is Keenan, and I'm a student in the master's program at UBC.
Having a hard time hearing you.
Yep, we're having a hard time hearing you. Are you able to put your question in the chat?
Sure, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Michael.
Hello, everybody. Michael Hunt here, Director of the McNair Scholars Program at UMBC, and a citizen of Baltimore County now, but born and raised and spent 35 of my years in Baltimore City. And so I'm very much excited about this project, but I'm also, it's interesting when Sally and them wrote the piece that I gave some feedback on it. And now I'm actually serving on a committee with the national, one of the National Student Affairs organizations called NASPA. They are having their conference in Baltimore in March. And so I was asked to serve on the Baltimore, like the host committee type thing to be able to bring in elements of Baltimore to the experience. One of the things that we notice in on this committee is about maybe 20 of us from around the country. About half of us are probably from the Baltimore metropolitan area. And when we start receiving information from vendors or of interest, it tends to always be, and again, we're having it at the convention center, it tends to always be people that they're showing what I would say the whitewash side of Baltimore, right? And so they're when we ask them for different room ideas or whatever for spaces so people can get a sense of Baltimore, you know, they focus on Fells Point, you know, they focus on the stadium, they focus on those areas around, but not really what the rich history of Baltimore in general. And so I'm just sharing, and I hope that part of this conversation is not just about what people can do, but how are we holding organizations or you know businesses and those that are down there that are supposed to be showcasing Baltimore, how are we holding those folks accountable to be able to really show the rich history of not just the white areas of Baltimore, but even where I lived in, you know, West Baltimore, et cetera. And there's a lot of history and a lot of opportunities and vendors from minority backgrounds who are not given a chance when dealing with like large conferences and stuff. Because when people come to Baltimore, that's where they typically go, is the Inner Harbor for a conference or something of that sort. And so I would just like to see more of our larger history shared.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Michael, I'll say amen to that. This is Joby again. And also, this is why we reframe this metaphor, the harbor as a hub. And I think all of these things, the challenge is going to be building the people's voice and the people's movement to realize it, to create the political will and the resources to do it. But you know, this tourist frame that essentially creates an economy for that kind of necessarily deals in just surface or stereotypical images of crabs and horses, and that you always have to kind of create walls around. And I think what we're really wanting to move forward is the idea of a hub that brings in all those communities and stories in as not just tourists in their own city, but as folks that are owning that space and creating it as a space of belonging where they can bring their full selves to. And so even after just the first release of this paper, we heard from the Northwest NAACP, for example, on the Liberty Road corridor. How can we get involved? The Southwest Partnership Coalition, how can we get involved? We're working with Arch Social Club in Pennsylvania Avenue. So I think with the Baltimore American Indian Center and my friend Ashley Minner, who's done all the great work on the Lumbee community in Baltimore, with our newcomers, thinking about Baltimore as a city with wave after wave after wave of immigrants representing all parts of the world. So yes, how can this process yield a space that actually is collectively felt like it's owned by our people and not just where you're touring inside your own city, but challenging for sure.
Great.
I just
Thank
like
you,
to,
Joby. Sally, go ahead, jump in. I'm sorry.
yeah, just jump in real quickly. I know, I mean, what's amazing is this chat, and we're going to preserve this and have it. But long ago there were the Baltimore City Fairs. I think even before Harbor Place and the pavilions were built. Having, I think it's a low-hanging fruit to have an event where neighborhoods or cultural organizations are invited to sign up for a booth at the harbor and come down and represent that history that Michael's talking about and that culture, which is, Baltimore's known really far and wide for a lot of things, but a lot of it is our vibrancy and culture. And you just don't feel it a lot when you're down there right now, and aren't tempted to go, let's go explore some other parts of the city. So I think there's some easy ways to get started on that without even changing the physical structure that we've got.
I totally agree, Sally, and we really welcome so many of these ideas. I think this winter we saw a surprising number of people out on the promenade, just enjoying the waterfront, coming down. The ice rink had the best year ever. Christmas Village was mobbed, Rashfield Park. And I think those are great initiatives to build on. So I'm really appreciating all of these ideas and suggestions. Let's hear from others more.
Yeah. Ebony,
Carmara?
yeah, Ebony's hand was up, and then I have Betty, Lair, and then David. I'm sorry I forgot about you, but I have you on my list as well. But Ebony, if you're off mute, you can go ahead and.
Yeah, I'm off mute. How are you? My name is Ebony Thorne. I own a small business here in the city. I'm an event stylist and I do designing and event production. So with my business, I've had the ability to reach out to multiple different and make connections with multiple different business owners and businesses within the city. And I was born and raised here. And so I was also a part of the team that brought H&M to the harbor. So we were a part of creating that flagship store. And I was able to witness just the difference even in seasons and how, the waterfront is affected because of that. And so because of that, I think that the best approach at this point, especially with someone my age group, knowing that most of the people in my age group are primary residents of the city between 25 and 34, I fit within that range. I think it would be helpful to get more insight from us, millennials especially, and how we can rejuvenate the city because we're in a totally different age from where we were previously. And we know that social media and everything is very relevant, and you can get people to come out just because they're looking to build, content easily. And so I think if you have the right attractions, aesthetics at the harbor, people will come. It's not that they don't go downtown. My friends often go to Harbor East because they are looking for fine dining, or they may go to Federal Hill because they want to hear certain types of music. It's just that it doesn't include all of the things that I feel like would make people want to come and are actually attracted to being there. And I read the article and I saw some people speaking about bringing history down to the harbor and everything. And I kind of feel like we should think about how New York is. 7th Avenue was known for the fashion district. So Soho was known for shopping or whatever. We can make those sectors or enclaves within downtown so that when people do call like and ask me, well, where's the best place to go for XYZ? Where should I go to learn history? We should have those areas already created where people know where to go for the things that they are interested in going to. So I think that, I don't know if there is a board or anything created with more of people in my age group, but I think we would be very much so interested in being a part of the conversation as to why we're choosing to go downtown, but just not specifically to the water, and what we would do to actually come to the water, which doesn't mean anybody else is excluded, but at least you know you're going to get the majority of the residents that reside in the city to come out, and then kind of make it more of that. I always speak about the 90s and how the harbor was in the 90s because it was just amazing back then, but how we can rejuvenate and make it kind of have that same sentiments, not only for tourists, but for residents as well.
Thank you so much, Ebony.
So helpful to hear. Thank you. And we do intend to continue the conversation. Would love to have smaller discussion groups, focus type groups with you and others that are interested. And so please, we've got your name and your email address, but if others are interested as well, and it sounds like people are,
Yeah,
so
in the chat, there's a lot of resonation with what you have said, Ebony, so thank you. I will also say this is, again, the beginning. We have about 15 minutes left. This will be ending at 1. There will be, more opportunities for conversations like this, but before I move on, let me get back to my list here. Betty, and then Lair, and then David.
Betty, you're on mute.
Yep, I'm wondering if she's able to, hold on. Chelsea probably has to.
Betty, I'm asking you to unmute. I don't know if you're seeing that pop up.
Host has to unmute. Okay.
Okay.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes,
we hear you.
Oh, okay. Well, hello, everyone. It was great to hear everyone's comments. And I guess the comment that I wanted to make is that the harbor is surrounded by communities, some of which are historic. And what a great opportunity to make some connectedness. And since we're Sharp-Leaton Hall are in walking distance, to the harbor, and we're looking forward to doing some heritage walk that could very well end in the harbor. I was talking with Adam the other day, and I said, it's so interesting. The harbor has no marking that, back in the early years, Maryland was a legalized slave state. And so the harbor was also, and Toby did not mention this part of our history, it was a point where slaves were also brought in. Baltimore get a lot of tourists, and a lot of Black tourists and older tourists, Ebony, that are interested in knowing more about the history of the city. And I think there's a great opportunity through Heritage Connection, Heritage Walks, to also bring the people even outside of the harbor to some of those historic points, and definitely having some markings to help identify these historic points and where you can go to get further, information. So this is great. I was on the webinar or the workshop for reimagining Middle Branch. And so it seems to be some possibility of connecting the two bodies of water. But as I said in that meeting, I surely want to share it here. One of the shortcomings I think that has been in the Inner Harbor Plan is that we must keep the water accessible to all people. Whether you're going to the rich restaurants, Ebony, people like to just come and sit and see the water. And I think that if there are more spaces, whether it's the walk and promenade or more seating, people really would enjoy coming down to the harbor. Not everyone can afford to spend a great deal. So my comment is, let's use our connecting communities as an opportunity to have them share their stories, and have the Inner Harbor have some markings of that where people can go and seek more of that information. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Beautiful, thank you.
Because we're coming close to time, Lair and David, if you keep your question to 1 minute or less, that would be great. So we can also get some responses. So Lair, if you're able to take yourself off mute, great.
My biggest problem with Baltimore.
They're picking me.
There we go.
Who's up?
It's you. Go ahead. Sorry, someone was not off mute. Go ahead.
My biggest problem with Baltimore has been leadership. And it's leadership from the development standpoint and the city standpoint. And when we envisioned Faneuil Hall Marketplace in Boston and Harbor Place in Baltimore, and started working on some of these urban waterfront projects, including Washington Wharf, their best days were really their first couple of years. And then they went downhill and sideways as developers' ownership changed. And you get people like Ashkenazi came in, he bankrupted Union Station, he bankrupted Harbor Place, and he's about to bankrupt Faneuil Hall. That is where the city really needs to come in and basically safeguard their city from these developers, because I think developers have really hurt Baltimore. The other thing about Baltimore is that you can't look at Harbor Place as just one catalyst, one anchor. We did a plan for Baltimore, and it shows that to make Baltimore work, you've got to have Harbor Place work, you have to have Penn Station work, you have to have Howard Street work. Howard Street's been the cancer spine of Baltimore for 50 years, and it really needs to change. So when you get all the communities working together and kind of restoring together and creating that residential mass for Baltimore, when we worked on Harbor Place way back in 1975, you know, the mandate was to get more people working in downtown, but not living, but it was really living and working in downtown. And
Mr. Jackson, sure sounds like
the residential population of Baltimore is worse than it was in 1926.
Thank you for your comment. There are a lot of comments here in the chat about, you know, better transportation and access and that aspect. And going back to what Keenan wrote in the chat too, I'm sorry I missed your comment about having, you know, open Fridays and events that celebrate culture, but also the transportation piece, you know, having people being able to get to the events and to the harbor is very important. So I thank you for that. And I think that really just brings that all together. Joby, did you want to have a comment before I move to David?
Oh, just quickly, Mr. Jackson, I'm sure I'd love to, you know, learn from some of that history as well. But Keenan, I think you mentioned Oakland, and I've seen this in cities around the world. You know, I have friends in Mexico City that when you ask them what they're doing on a Sunday, they're getting on their bikes because the main boulevard, you know, running all the way to downtown is is open to pedestrian and bike traffic. So I think something along the lines of an occasional series of summer Sundays or something that close Pratt Street all the way around the Key Highway past AVAM, or something, and calls communities to come down and creates a bit of refreshing, renewing our sense of downtown is for our people, and how to rethink it. I think something like that would be wonderful. It's happening in other cities and places around the world now, and I think that's an easy one to do, and we'd see what lessons we took from it.
Yeah. Laurie, any other comments?
No,
All right.
nice to hear from one or two more folks before we.
Yes, let's try. Okay, David, and then Bryce, I see your hand up. So David, sorry about you moving down my list, but if you're able to take yourself off mute and ask your question, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I believe Ebony kind of like went through a lot of it, really about like how we need to really, and a lot of people really we need to involve more of the Baltimore communities into the harbor. And to what I believe Sally said, that goes back to a lot of authenticity. So, you know, what I'm thinking is always like, yeah, we need to show tourists, like, this is Baltimore, this is what we're about. And I would love to see, I'm an event planner here in Baltimore, and I've done everything from comedy shows to hip hop festivals. And I want to see not a hip hop festival, but I want to see things like, I want to see the Easy Jacksons and the ill consciousness of the city to come down to Baltimore and really do their thing. And I want them to be like, oh, this is Baltimore's about. We have so many good artists. We have so many good event planners. We have so many creative ideas. And I just want to see people reach out. That's the main thing for me, is I want to see people reach out to that. Also, we have a lot of chain restaurants down there. I believe that we need to find a way to bring more local restaurants and stuff down there. Like, for example, M&S Grill, they've been they've been, that's been gone for what, 6-7 years now. I think we just need to bring more of Baltimore and show people what Baltimore is really like as soon as they come into this city. So.
Thanks, David.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
I just wanted to jump in a second, if we can, that to build on what David said. If you haven't seen the movie Dark City Beneath the Beat, you should, because it's really about Baltimore's dance culture. And there's a scene in that movie where they're dancing in the inner harbor in front of some of the historic ships. And it just brings that historic site to life in a new way that I had never experienced, just seeing that on the screen. And I think there's, what David's talking about is creating that kind of energy and dynamism through events and through cultural events. And I know some of that's happening, but I think there's room for a lot more of it.
We agree, Sally. We had Be More Dance perform at the Inner Harbor every Friday and Sunday all summer long at the amphitheater. It was wildly popular, but I think we have to spread the word more. And to David and to Ebony's point, find even more opportunities. I'm sorry, Carmara, were you going to call on Bryce?
Yes, I was, but yep. Go ahead, Bryce, if you're able to take yourself off mute.
Thanks. Wow, this is great. I really wanted to thank Joby and Sally for presenting some great goals and a really good structure framework for which to contemplate ideas at the harbor. I was hoping to get some great ideas here myself today, as someone who gets involved in a lot of mixed use and waterfront stuff up and down the East Coast. And I think there's some great ideas bubbling up. I love the idea of getting more music there. I think local food, clearly in Baltimore, local food works really well. So I think that's a no-brainer. But I think a couple other things, maybe we can celebrate our waterfront industry. I think would be interesting, people who really worked in that industry and who do work in that industry. And maybe we can blur the line a little bit and have a little less formality, a little less harder edges to some of this. So it's a little easier to dip your toe in the water, if you will, and to even put your foot onto a barge or some other vessels would be really great. I think we need to reduce vehicles. I heard somebody else say that. I think, going from Johns Hopkins University to I-95 should not be a shortcut by going down by the harbor, and vice versa. And so I think it's easy to find other routes for people to take. More density and more neighborhood kind of stuff, connecting to the neighborhoods that exist in South Baltimore, Federal Hill, the high rises along Light Street would be great. And so I think density is our friend here, more people living and working there. Promoting local art, music, and diversity of Baltimore clearly is a great thing. There's some good examples out there, and a new one that I've been studying is in Los Angeles, which is Hauser and Worth. And they've done a really good job of kind of connecting art galleries, art market for local vendors and pop-ups to coexist. And there's a big placemaking component of that too, with food and as well. So I think it's a great way to connect art and architecture for placemaking, which is certainly important for us. So it's really great. Other great examples we should know about the wharf in DC, but to me, that's just kind of Harbor Place in some ways, the updated version of it. I think we could, we can go beyond that, but what they did do well is have some of that informality I talked about, and more offices and residences, which is really, I think, very positive there. And certainly people want to be there, and it's a great way to socialize. It's a wonderful melting pot. If we can get all this right and get people to engage, because I think that's what these kinds of spaces should be. I love the idea of the harbor as a hub. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Panelists, if you want to respond to Bryce, and then we'll get ready to close.
Well, I think Bryce he's really summed it up quite well. There's ideas from other cities, but we've got a lot of it here. We have a ton to work with. And some of this has started to take place, but it can go. it can go much further. And I think what Jovi and I've talked about is Baltimore sometimes has low expectations for itself. I think here we have a beautiful place that could be even more compelling, more vibrant, and our expectations should be actually very high for where we go and what we achieve.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Lauren?
creative, bold. What I'd like to just leave close saying is let's not think about this as a decision, but as a movement for people in Baltimore to assert the need for a reimagining that involves these values. And so if you belong to an association or an organization, ask them about reimagining Baltimore. If you call your city council member or send a note to the mayor or whatever through your networks, let's drive a broader public conversation that can create some will to do the process right, because we know how the path of least resistance will be to follow the fault lines that are so deep in our city neighborhoods that they've been entrenched there for decades and decades and decades. And so we really have to build a movement of sorts to reimagine boldly and broadly. Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Thanks, Jovi.
Thank
Laurie?
you. Been terrific. And I agree, we need the larger, broader conversation, and that should continue. And also, let's roll our sleeves up and get some things done this spring and summer. And I think many of the ideas we heard from so many, including Terrell and David and Ebony, summed up well by Bryce. We can get some festivals this summer, bring Baltimore artists to the community, to the harbor. Be More Dance is a great group that had a great draw last summer. So let's get together and talk about what events we can get going this summer at the harbor while having that broader conversation. So thank you, Sally and Joby and Carmara. Thank you for facilitating. I'll let you close out, but I really want to thank everybody for your active participation and commitment today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming here in the middle of your day to participate in this discussion of many. We really want to encourage you to take the survey in the chat. I think Chelsea just posted that. If you could post that again. We hope that you'll continue to share your stories and your questions and your feedback. There was so much information in the chat, and really want to call out the themes of building relationships, accountability, authenticity, providing access and opportunity. I really think that resonated with all of you on the call today. Really appreciate you being here and sharing your comments and your questions. So please participate in our survey. And if you're interested in a small group conversation or focus group or anything like that, please participate in that survey and let us know. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. We look forward to checking in with you and following up with you with the recording and also the survey again in an email. We have all of your contact information if you registered for this webinar today. So really, really appreciate all of you. Thank you so much and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you all.